This video is sponsored by the Luminous Lore Kickstarter. What makes a good D&D book cover? In mid-May, the D&D team revealed the cover for the new player's handbook, and there was a good deal of discourse around it on Twitter. I've been really trying not to spend that much time on Twitter these days. It's so bad for my brain and soul, but you know, when you're feeding your newborn baby every 2 hours, sometimes you do just need to do some mindless scrolling. Now, there are some folks who just didn't vibe with this cover for whatever reasons, and that's fine. Art is subjective. And there are others who insisted it was AI generated when the article that announced it actually preemptively included Tyler Jacobson's process art to demonstrate that it absolutely wasn't AI. So anybody speculating that it was just frustrated with how prolific AI art has become in general, and you know, same. Or they're just frustrated with Wizards of the Coast and not willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, which, you know, fair. But again, we have the proof, we know this isn't AI, so this should be a non-issue. But there were also a lot of people who just didn't feel like this art was the right fit for the player's handbook cover. But speaking personally, I actually think this cover does a great job of capturing what these designers are going for. And to show you what I mean, I actually want to walk you through several covers from previous players' handbooks or other similar books or products intended for brand new D&D players. Because here's the thing. I think the most important goal of any piece of cover art is to properly capture the feel of the game, so new players know what to expect. And I've always been fascinated by the different ways D&D book covers try to pitch the game's contents to whoever happens to be randomly walking past the bookshelf. Because I think some of these covers totally nail it, and others seem to wildly miss the mark. So that's what we're talking about today. What makes a great D&D cover, and why do I think this is one of the better covers I've seen, at least in the past 17 years in the hobby? I honestly thought this was going to be a quick video. I just had a straight run of 30-minute long videos and I needed something simpler, but I guess this isn't going to be it because it turns out I had a lot of thoughts on this one. Now, before we get into this, just a reminder, once again, art is subjective. I'm going to talk about some art that I think makes great D&D book covers and others that I don't. And I'm going to do my best to explain why I think some of these covers do a better job than others of hooking new players into the hobby. But also, if you like some of these pieces of cover art more than I do, that's fine. If you don't like a piece of art that I like, that's also fine. And even more importantly, you might feel like some of these other covers do a better job of capturing what you like about D&D as a game, and that's 100% valid. I'd love for you to let me know in the comments where you disagree with me about which D&D covers do a better or worse job of selling the game to a new player, especially if they speak to a difference in our priorities and what we think is important for new players to know. But also, let's please remember that no matter what edition we're talking about, no matter what creator or company published the book at the time, all the art we're going to discuss today was created by human artists doing their best. When I express my issues with the art that we're talking about today, my issue is really with the art direction of the book and the creative choices the publishers made about what should go on the front cover. By no means do I intend to drag any of these artists through the mud. As somebody who has a little bit of history drawing D&D characters, I know I couldn't create anything like what we're going to see on any of these book covers. So that is absolutely not what I'm trying to imply when I discuss where I feel a cover falls short of the mark. Hopefully we're all on the same page about this. My goal is always to only enrich the D&D community, which is why I'm very happy to tell you about today's sponsor, the Luminous Lore Kickstarter. This D&D supplement presents options for running a game surrounding the magic of dreams. You get new monsters, artifacts, factions, locations, spells, over 10 new subclasses, and a whole approach to dream magic designed to help you channel the magic of dreams. And the folks behind Luminous Lore have also teamed up with Only Crits, so if you're one of the first 200 backers, you'll get a set of Elemental Dragon Resin dice for free. And the Luminous Lore Kickstarter is launching today. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment, so please check it out, consider supporting the project, and make their dream a reality. Make their dream. Thank you so much to the Luminous Lore Kickstarter for sponsoring the video. First, I want to jump back to the early days of the hobby and take a look at the first real art piece designed to pitch the game to new players. I don't have a ton to say about the cover for the white box, the very earliest image ever to grace the cover of any D&D product, just because they had so little to work with. They could really only print a very simple piece of black and white art. They didn't have an art budget. They had very little real estate, so the image had to be very simple in order to be readable on the box. Like, it's a solid piece of art, but it's just not at all comparable to the book covers that we'll be covering for the rest of this video. Technically, it does fall into a trap that a lot of these other covers fall for, but given the limitations of the medium they had, I don't think they had any alternative. Anyway, I'm going to skip around in time a little bit, so we're going to jump all the way ahead to the cover for the Player's Handbook for the first edition of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. And it's genuinely iconic. A big statue of a sneering fiend with gems for eyes, everything in the image is lit primarily from the orange light of his brazier, the rest of the room is in darkness. That's all excellent. Add to that the fact that there are some dead lizard folk in the demon's lap, and a few adventurers standing around and essentially taking care of some after-battle tasks. A warrior cleans his sword, and 2 other adventurers review a map. That's great too. We know there's combat involved, but also the game is already telling us that you might need to maintain your weapons and keep them in good shape, and that you'll be exploring dungeons, which is a huge part of early D&D. But the most striking part of the image has to be the two adventurers who have crawled up onto the statue's head and are in the process of prying the gems out of its eyes. So in a nutshell, this cover is telling us the gameplay loop for D&D. It's not just about fighting fearsome monsters. In fact, as you'll go on to see, this is one of the few covers that really de-emphasizes monster slaying and being a badass. Instead, it focuses on exploration and on recovering rewards. Great cover, well done. Now, when the Player's Handbook was reprinted, we got this image of a wizard casting spells and slaying demons. And I kind of always thought this was a Dungeon Master's Guide cover, and the wizard was conjuring monsters instead of slaying them. But finally sitting down and looking at all of these book covers for this video, I see that I was mistaken. This cover does fall victim to the D&D book cover art trap, and put a pin in that, we'll come back to it soon. But otherwise, this cover is noteworthy for being one of the only covers to prominently display a magic user. We're going to see a lot more warriors front and center in a lot of these covers. Now, this is kind of a strange cover, because obviously it's saying, hey, crack this book open and you'll find out how you can play a magical character who can slay monsters. And fair enough. To some degree, that's what a lot of these covers are saying. We're also seeing combat on this cover, which is quite a change from the first printing. But I don't love the choice to leave him in an ambiguous environment. Like, I wish we got some sense of geography or environment. The fact that this powerful figure seems to be emerging from the mist and smoke and maybe summoning monsters is exactly why I always thought this was a Dungeon Master's Guide cover. AD&D 2nd edition features a cover of some warriors riding on horseback through a canyon. And when all this Twitter discourse was happening, Matt Colville weighed in by tweeting about this cover and about how he felt this was very clearly not intended to be the cover when it was commissioned. Now, I don't know if that's true, I don't know if he knows that for a fact or if it's just his theory, but I do want to highlight his second tweet. This was the cover for the Player's Handbook for years. Most exciting thing they could think of, emblematic of the game within, which is obviously very seriously about mounted combat. I basically feel the same way. It's weird that this was the big cover they went with. It's also strange that there is no indication that anyone else in the scene is anything but a warrior. Something you'll notice in a lot of these group shots is that there's often a warrior and usually a magic user right behind them. The goal is, of course, to show off the different classes you can play if you buy this book. So to just reduce everyone down to warriors on horses is a very strange choice. Again, no shade to the artist, I actually think it's a great image. But it seems a strange choice for the Player's Handbook cover. But when the 2nd edition Player's Handbook was revised in 1995, we got this shot of a warrior bashing down a door with a bow wielder and a magic user peering out from behind him, ready for action. Here we go. We are back, baby. First of all, we're back in a dungeon. Second, we have a nice spread of different classes, so the potential players know which core fantasies might be available to them. Nice work avoiding the D&D book cover art trap, by the way. Third, I love the design of this warrior. He's very Conan inspired. Not the Conan from the short stories, but the one from the Arnold Schwarzenegger film. But also, we're starting to get much more dynamic action. The hero is actually doing something. He's making an impact, literally, on the world of the game. Boy, I sure hope the next couple of editions don't drastically walk that back in favor of much less dramatic imagery, because that would be a drag. But before we get there, I want to jump back in time a few decades. In 1977, the year before the AD&D Player's Handbook with the Demon statue, TSR released the Dungeons & Dragons basic set. This art is pretty crude, but it's still effective. We've got a huge red dragon sitting on a pile of gold in a dungeon, so literally the name of the game, a dragon in a dungeon, so far so good. Can you believe none of the other Player's Handbooks we've covered have done that? It's kind of weird, right? There are two adventurers in the foreground, a knight wearing a green shield, who we'll call the Green Knight, and a wizard in blue robes, aka the Blue Wizard. It also falls victim to the D&D book cover art trap, more on that in a minute. And then in 1983, the basic set was reprinted as the Red Box, and we got this iconic piece of art featuring a warrior facing off against a red dragon. And this is an excellent piece of art. The dragon has so much personality, the warrior has a cool design. Once again, we're getting a horned helmet, although I guess this one predates the 2nd edition revision that we just talked about by more than a decade, actually. But it's an interesting trend. There's a hoard of gold beneath the dragon, but I kind of love how smooth it is. Like, it just looks like it stretches off towards the horizon. I also like the obelisk in the background. It's a little detail, but it helps add scale to the dragon. No pun intended. And perhaps the most clever innovation by the artist Larry Elmore was that the warrior had their back to us, so anybody could imagine themselves as that warrior. I think this actually does a nice job of capturing the feel of D&D. Aside from the fact that it falls for the D&D book cover art trap, but we'll get there. But you know what's funny? I know we're in the middle of discussing a specific bit of D&D discourse, but I'm going to pause and examine another piece of D&D discourse that occurred around this piece of art at the beginning of May. See, WizKids announced that they were making minis for the Blue Wizard and the Green Knight from the D&D basic set cover that we just talked about, and they were making minis of the main characters from the Dungeons & Dragons cartoon. But they're also making a mini based on this warrior from the Red Box. And because we can't see the warrior's face in this image, they had to take some creative liberties. And so they've chosen to interpret this character as a woman. As you can see from the mini, she's a lady now. So this got the backlash you expected. Some people were upset because the character had originally been created as a man, which was confirmed by the artist Larry Elmore. Although Larry then clarified that although this wasn't his original intention, the change essentially represents what makes D&D cool. That anybody can see themselves as the hero. Now, someone actually reached out to me and asked me for my thoughts on this whole controversy, and so all I have to say is this. If the warrior's creator assumed the warrior was male when they first came into this world, and now we're learning that this hero is a lady, that just means that she's trans, doesn't it? I mean, that's clearly what that means. How progressive. Way to go, whiz kids. Happy Pride. Now, that being said, as happy as I am that we have a definitely canonically transgender D&D heroine depicted in one of the most iconic pieces of art in the history of the hobby, this is also not something worth getting bent out of shape over. Like, some people were reacting like Wizards of the Coast went back in time and defaced all the old copies of the Red Box by declaring that the warrior is now female. And like, whatever. If that's how you feel, then you're giving WotC the power to control how you perceive a piece of art that is several decades old that you clearly have some history with. You're renting them space in your brain for free. If you don't like what they say, ignore them. You're an adult. Others are arguing that this was done out of purely cynical pandering, and to be fair, I think they have a stronger case. I don't know what was in the hearts of the toy makers. Like, I suspect they earnestly just saw an opportunity to create a buff female hero figure, something that we just don't get to see very often in D&D miniatures, especially one who isn't overly sexualized, and they genuinely thought it would just be cool. That being said, regardless of whether the creatives were earnestly just trying to diversify the product line a little bit more, the marketing team absolutely hyped up the fact that this was controversial to get more clicks, which means if you got upset about this, you did fall directly into their trap, so well done. But also, most of us are never going to buy this mini. Actually, correction, you can't just buy this mini directly from WizKids. Just like the Green Knight, the Blue Wizard, and the kids from the cartoon, the Red Box Warrior mini is only available in a few boxes of random minis. It's part of a loot box, which is hardly a business practice I have any interest in defending. Dungeons & Discourse did a great video about this quote-unquote controversy and how this discourse really just serves to distract you from the fact that you can't get any of these minis unless you buy their loot boxes, which is maybe the more relevant topic to get upset about rather than whether or not the warrior from a 41-year-old piece of art is a woman. But that being said, if she is a woman, which they say she is, then she's also definitely trans. I don't think it makes any sense to deny that. Anyway, returning to our tour of the Player's Handbooks of yore, the 3rd edition Player's Handbook took a hard left turn. It looks like some sort of valuable tome from the world of the game, with gems embedded on the cover. The 3.5 Player's Handbook looks very, very similar. And then we get the covers for the 3 4th edition Player's Handbooks. The first has a dragonborn warrior and a human mage posing in a cave. I like this piece of art. I like the colors. I like that it's not too dark. It's actually a good way to set the tone for this game. It's appropriate for a version of the game that was more heroic fantasy than its predecessors. The artwork is also more stylized, which I appreciate. There's some comic book influence here. That's not always my favorite. It's hit and miss for me, but I think it works here just fine. I also like that we're highlighting a Dragonborn on the cover, since that's one of the races in the book that hadn't been in other players' handbooks. Dragonborn had been introduced in one of the 3.5 supplements, but it got promoted to the player's handbook with 4th edition. And I do think we're transitioning toward the more action hero style artwork we're going to get with 5th edition. But we're not quite there yet, because we don't get any sense that these characters are actually in combat. In fact, if we look behind these heroes, we can vaguely see a few others following them in the tunnel, so it kind of just seems like they're dungeon crawling at the moment. And then these two stopped to pose? I guess that does kind of communicate the idea that you're going to be in combat a lot in this game. You'd spend more time in initiative than you would in exploration mode, but that's kind of a stretch, right? And even if that is what they were going for, which I don't think it is, I still don't think it's as strong as what we'd go on to see in 5th edition. Also, even though there are 2 allies coming up behind the tunnel, I'm still going to say that this cover falls into the D&D book cover art trap. The Player's Handbook 2 cover features a Goliath Barbarian and a Shifter Shaman. Both of these characters are designed to show off a couple of the new races and classes available in this book, which is really smart design. However, we have moved away from the more distinctive art style into something painted, which is fine, it doesn't look bad, but I do miss that strong art choice of the first handbook. Although this cover also isn't helped by the fact that shifters just have very weirdly shaped faces, so it does kind of look like something's wrong with the art. There's not, it's just the uncanny valley effect of the shifter cheekbones. I kind of feel this way about most shifter art I've seen throughout the hobby. And of course, it still falls for the D&D book cover art trap. And the final 4th edition Player's Handbook features a Minotaur and a Githzeri, 2 of the new races in the book. They're both repping new classes as well. I believe the Minotaur is a rune priest, and my guess is the Githzeri is a monk. And yes, well spotted, this does fall for the D&D book cover art trap. You're learning. Okay, so I've been hinting at it all video, so let's talk about it. Here are all the covers that I said fell into the D&D book cover art trap. You know something they all have in common?
Where the hell is everybody?
D&D is a team game, and yet these covers all fall for the same trap. They fail to display a team of heroes. They either only show one hero or two, and when they show two, they always do the same thing. They present a warrior and a spellcaster, usually a wizard. The 3rd 4th edition Player's Handbook fudges that a little bit, but I'm still going to count it, because it's just trying to show off two of the easiest classes to pitch to a new player, and specifically showing off two very different classes. And that's the idea behind these pieces of art. Like, you want to show new players what they could do, what kinds of characters they can play. And in D&D, you have lots of options. But the easiest to understand are the warrior and the mage. After all, those are the two that we see repeated the most often on these covers, because they're the characters we see most repeated in fantasy fiction. Well, okay, fantasy fiction actually has a lot of thieves, so D&D illustrators could put rogues on the cover. Except the game isn't really about sneaking around and stealing stuff anymore. It's about fighting monsters. So they highlight the two most clear core fantasies they can imagine, the warrior and the mage. Now, there's nothing wrong with that decision in a vacuum. It makes perfect sense, and it's yielded some excellent art pieces. Heck, check out the cover of Pathfinder's first core rulebook. 2 characters, a warrior and a spellcaster, facing off against a fearsome red dragon. Not exactly treading new ground, but the art itself is incredible. It's such a dynamic piece. It's one of my favorite covers from the entire selection. Again, it helps that there's some clear stylization. It kind of reminds me of comic book art in a lot of ways, but also just the layout of this image is incredible. I would never want to imply that this is a bad cover. However, I think it has the same problem that so many of these other covers have. It seems like when whoever was choosing which heroes would appear on the cover just stopped with their first idea. And because there are only 2 heroes on the cover, you're also not doing a good job of capturing the feeling of having a table full of your friends all charging into battle together. And once you notice this, you start to see it everywhere. The first starter set, the Essentials kit, the second starter set, Fantasy Age 1st edition, Fantasy Age 2nd edition, 7th C. Again, I don't think any of these are bad pieces of art. Some of them are actually amazing. But it's so weird to me that so many of these covers stop at 2-player characters when it's far more common for there to be at least 3 players at the table. Now, I'll absolutely concede that it is hard to get more than 2 heroes onto a cover this narrow. But I want to show you just how bizarre this trend gets. See, here's the cover for The Lost Mine of Phandelver Adventure. 4 heroes, 2 heavily armored, 2 that look like casters. One of the mages is casting a shield dome over the party, while one of the warriors charges toward the green dragon. Great cover, demonstrates a party fighting together, we love it. So why is it cropped to just 1 hero for the starter set box art? I mean, it makes the dragon fill up a lot more of the image, and the hero is a lot smaller, so it's a more striking image that makes the stakes seem more dire. So is that the reason? And is that worth losing out on the pitch to new players that are going to be part of a badass team? Because maybe that's just where I'm coming from. I think that's an easier pitch than it used to be. See, in the old days of the hobby, when you were trying to pitch the game to your friends, the main point of comparison you could make was by comparing the game to fantasy books. And a lot of fantasy books have a single protagonist, and a lot of fantasy art features just one dude charging into action. And I love a lot of that old fantasy art. I think it's an awesome part of the hobby, of the tradition of this game, to find old Conan art and imagine what it would be like to be that hero. But I also think that our hobby kind of got stuck on these sorts of images for a long, long time. And considering how much comic book influence seemed to be sneaking into some of the more recent covers, it's frankly a bit surprising it's taken so long to start getting book covers that feature more than 2 heroes on the cover. That being said, we did get that with Pathfinder 2nd edition, and while as a piece of standalone art, I personally prefer the 1st edition cover, I also feel like the 2nd edition art does a better job of communicating what this game is actually like, because it shows more than just 2 heroes on the cover. Now, something else of note is the fact that Pathfinder has its own core characters, who they use as the example characters for just about everything, from cover art to miniatures. They're called the Iconics. I might make another video about them in the future. I don't know very much about them at all, but I would be very interested to dig into them a little bit and specifically discuss some of the design choices around each character, and how they're designed to communicate their class concept at a glance. Really smart design. But as a consequence of the decision of having iconic characters like this, each Pathfinder book or comic or whatever that features the Iconics feels like part of a unified whole. I hadn't even played Pathfinder until last year, and I still knew that when you see this guy, you're looking at something from Pathfinder. Now, I made a video in 2022 where I discussed how Pathfinder encroaching on D&D's territory basically forced D&D to double down on the stuff that only they could do, namely focusing on their IP. And interestingly, we kind of saw Wizards of the Coast learning that lesson as early as the 5th edition Player's Handbook. This cover art features 2 adventurers, a warrior and someone who I think may be a druid, fighting a fire giant. And in fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but to my understanding, this is the first time any of the characters on the Player's Handbook cover are actually named characters. Although here, it's not the adventurers who get names, but apparently the adversary on the cover is a figure from the D&D lore. This is King Snur, an adversary from the classic adventure Hall of the Fire Giant King. He's the titular Fire Giant King. He wears a white dragon pelt to protect him from cold attacks, which does give him a really striking profile, and gives him a horned helmet, kind of. He also has some hellhounds preparing to attack. You can see them in the background of the cover, but it's easier to see them on the full art, which wraps around the back of the book. This is what Wizards of the Coast can do that no other company can. They can dip into their vast library of lore and use iconic characters that no other company has the rights to. Unfortunately, when we look at other resources available for players in 5th edition, I think maybe they learned the wrong lesson. See, they didn't want to release multiple players' handbooks, which is fine because their supplemental books would also include content for Dungeon Masters, so calling them Players' Handbooks 2 and 3 would be erroneous, just like calling them Monster Manuals 2 or 3 wouldn't make any sense when they also include options for players. So they instead named these books after iconic characters in their lore. Xanathar's Guide to Everything, named after a crime lord in Waterdeep who was also a beholder, and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, named after a famous Greyhawk witch. And as I discussed in that other video, I think this was the right call from a branding perspective. But we're here to talk about covers, so I have to say, if you look at the cover to Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and we assume you don't know everything about it already, what would you think this book is about? Would you guess that it included a bunch of new options for players, new subclasses? I don't think you would. Tasha's Cauldron, okay, she's a witch casting a spell over a cauldron, so that's at least a magic user. We can compare that to AD&D's Player's Handbook reprint. I don't think it quite captures the energy of an adventuring party, but at least it gets closer to depicting the experience of a magic user adventurer. And yet, Tasha is an NPC. Xanathar is an NPC. The other characters who have books named after them, like Volo and Bigby and Mordenkainen, those are NPCs. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I do think it's kind of funny that of all these books that feature adventurers on the cover, not one of those characters has a name. And if they do, it's because they're NPCs the party's expected to interact with, not stand-ins for the characters like Pathfinder's Iconics. Now, if we broaden our scope a little bit, that's not 100% true across the board. The second starter set adventure features the characters from the D&D cartoon battling a blue dragon, and those are characters with distinct names and identities who aren't also powerful NPCs in the worlds of D&D. The Acquisitions Incorporated book features Omen Drawn from that actual play franchise. He was a player character. And the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide features a group of heroes who I think were basically meant to be Wizards of the Coast's iconics, at least for the Forgotten Realms. But we're going to talk about the covers for setting books another time, because those books kind of have a different mandate than your typical player-facing books like the Player's Handbook. And we are definitely going to talk about this group of adventurers another day, because Wizards of the Coast seem to have high hopes for them, or at the very least for Hitch, the character in the front. And then let's just say that some of those plans fell apart. But now we are finally caught up with present day, well, like a month ago when I first started thinking about this topic, and we can take a look at the new Player's Handbook cover. And hopefully now that we've gone through my feelings on all those previous covers, you'll be able to tell why I like this so much. First of all, we got an action pose. This pose is very similar to what we got with the 4th edition Player's Handbook, except now we can actually see what they're dealing with. So there's a lot more storytelling happening on the cover itself. These heroes are essentially posing like they're the Avengers, which is fantastic. Each character's pose is different, and yet they're all dramatic and cool. And yes, the cover avoided the D&D book cover art trap. Way more than 2 heroes and a nice diversity of them. Not just in class and race, but also bonus points for some ethnic and gender diversity, which also sends the message that D&D isn't just for teenage boys and 30-something white guys. It's for anybody. And that's a great message to send. I love that they put it front and center on the cover. I also love the design of these heroes. They all have very clear color schemes that don't wash into each other. The one thing I dislike about the core rulebooks for 2014 D&D is that each cover is overwhelmed by a specific color choice. I don't mind a lot of orange, but there is so much orange that I frequently fail to notice the warrior near the bottom of the image. He just washes out to me. The art for the Dungeon Master's Guide is incredible, but I do kind of wish there was more distinct difference in the colors between Acererak and his victim, because as it stands right now, I can't always tell where one character ends and the other begins, and that kind of waters down the impact this image is meant to have. But here we have a lot of striking colors and very clear separations between all these characters. I like the use of kobolds instead of the far more typical goblins or undead, if for no other reason than they look like tiny dragons, and the name of the game is Dungeons & Dragons. And speaking of which, not only is there a dragon on this D&D cover, which is always a nice treat, but there are 2. A red dragon menaces the heroes in the foreground, and a gold dragon rises up behind them. Now, the gold dragon was chosen because D&D has been around for 50 years, so this is the game's golden anniversary, and that's cute. That's a nice touch. But I also think we're getting some other useful information from the gold dragon's presence. See, if you look at the heroes closely, none of them are facing the gold dragon, so we can assume that they're not worried about him. Of course, if you're new to the game, you might not make that assumption, and that's fine. You might just think the heroes are cheating out so the audience can see their faces better, unlike the badass gal from the cover of the red box. But in truth, the gold dragon is very deliberately positioned to be an ally to the heroes, to try to communicate the idea that some dragons are good and some dragons are bad. I'm not sure how well that comes across yet, but it's a really nice detail if you pick up on it. But even if you don't, this gold dragon still tells us a lot, because the dragon isn't just roaring, it's reaching out with one hand, not to claw at the heroes, but in a far more human position, like it's in the middle of talking. The angle of its head and the way its mouth is open also reinforces this idea. So already the cover is teaching you something about the dragons of this world. And of course, we're in a dungeon, so we've got dragons in a dungeon for the first time since 1977. And finally, it seems Wizards of the Coast has finally embraced making its iconic heroes front and center of the book. These are characters who I think are from Greyhawk, but they all date back to the very early days of the game. We've got Yolande, the Elven Queen, Strongheart the Knight, although some documents from the old days called him a Paladin. We've got Elkhorn, the Dwarven Warrior, Mercion, the Cleric, and Molliver, the Rogue. Apologies if any of that's the wrong pronunciation. A few of them have gotten race lifts, but they're still very much the same characters. And to be frank, that seems like something Wizards of the Coast would never do with any of their earlier 5th edition books, with their focus on named characters who would typically be NPCs in most games. But now they're actually leaning into the idea that the player's handbook is a chance for them to show off their collection of heroes who can serve as inspiration for a new generation of gamers. That's something we can see in the article announcing this cover, in this quote from Josh Herman, studio art director for Wizards of the Coast. A lot of our chapter openers are famous heroes. Almost every chapter opening features a different hero or a group of heroes in a different setting. So you've got Dragonlance and other ones like Ravenloft, you've got a whole suite of them. The back cover features a party of brand new and currently unnamed adventurers, who all have excellent designs by the way, and they're riding on the back of a bronze dragon. And from the other art they've previewed, it seems like metallic dragons will be featured prominently in more than a few different art pieces in the book. And again, that makes sense. If you're trying to use your IP to hook new fans, you might as well lean all the way into it. So yeah, all that to say, this cover is good, and y'all are being weird about it. This statement probably would have had more of an impact if I had made a video less than a month after the cover came out. Look, I don't tend to cover current events on this channel, and this is why. It takes me some time to respond to stuff. Now, at this point in the video, I was going to go through the new Dungeon Master's Guide cover and compare it to the Dungeon Master's Guides of the past, but this video is more than long enough. I do not know how that happened. I really need to make some short videos soon, but I just have so much I want to talk about whenever I get into any of these topics, and there's so many topics I want to cover, so let me know in the comments if you want me to do another one of these videos for the Dungeon Master's Guide. And then maybe I could come back later on and do the Monster Manual once they release the art for the new cover for that one. It's been fun keeping up with these art releases. I'm getting kind of cautiously optimistic about the future of this game. And as I mentioned earlier, let me know if you want me to do another one of these for campaign setting covers, and maybe even for adventure covers. Again, if you'd like to see this become a series, then let me know in the comments below. While you're down there, make sure to like and subscribe and ring the bell so you can stay notified every time I drop a new video. You're definitely going to want to ring the bell because I have a bunch of bonus videos coming out over the course of this week. You don't want to miss any of them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or YouTube memberships or Ko-fi, whatever's easiest for you, if that's something you're even interested in doing at all. If not, no worries. All are welcome in my channel's Discord server, so come check that out. And don't forget to sign up for my mailing list to stay up to date with my latest comings and goings. Click here to watch my video about how to create a new pantheon for your game using tarot cards as inspiration. That was a ton of fun to make. Until next time, play fair and have fun.